Okay, in this video I'm going to take a look at buying a house or apartment, a residential property, from start to finish. I've been buying property, or bought my first property in 1986 in Dublin, so I've bought a fair few and sold a fair few since then. I've bought all sorts of properties, residential, commercial sites, buildings. I've bought pubs, stripped them out. But bottom line is, I've learnt a few things along the way, and from the perspective of somebody looking to buy their own home for the first time, a residential property, be it an apartment or be it a house, I think I can give you some pointers. First thing you need to consider, obviously, is the location of your property. Now, the circumstances that are going to determine the best location for you, and every location won't be best for you. Clearly, Dublin 4, south side of Dublin, Dublin 2 are the best locations you can get. But if you're working in Longford, or working on the south side, or working on the north side of Dublin, or working in Mullingar someplace, then clearly the very best location in the country is of no benefit to you. So the first thing you need to do is consider your particular circumstances. Your particular circumstances are going to be where you want to live, where your work is, where your partner's work is, and where you want to bring up a family, and so on. And after that, then, when you decide on the best location for you, I would suggest trying to buy the worst property in the best location for you. In other words, you don't want to get hung up on getting the very best property, or getting a really good property which may be in a location that doesn't actually suit you. What you want to do is get the best location for you, and if that involves getting the worst property but the one that you can afford, then that's probably the one you should go with. Assuming that you've got the right property for yourself, assuming you've chosen the correct location for you, then you need to negotiate. Having looked around, looked at the properties, you've visited a number of properties, you'll have met a number of auctioneers and so on, you need to negotiate to get the property for the best price you can. I would advise you to take what a negotiator or what an auctioneer says to you with a large pinch of salt, because their job is to sell the property on behalf of their client. Their client is the vendor. Their client is not you. You're the punter. You're the purchaser. So just be careful of that. In other words, you can trust what they say but verify. As Ronald Reagan used to say, trust but verify. So take it with a large grain of salt. When the sales advice note comes out, after you've successfully bought the property, what you're going to get is a big ass disclaimer on the sales advice note, basically saying that all representations that were made to you prior to this are subject to contract denied, and basically what you're going to be relying on is what's in the contract, not what was said before by anybody, including the auctioneer. So keep that in mind. You need to pay a booking deposit then. There's a big difference between a booking deposit and a contract deposit. Booking deposit is just a deposit you pay to the auctioneer to secure the property. It will be 5 or 6 grand, and it's fully refundable if you change your mind or if the thing falls through. The contract deposit, on the other hand, is 10% of the purchase price, and that's payable when you sign the contract. But before the contract is signed, a sales advice note will go out from the auctioneer to the solicitors for both the vendor and the purchaser. So your solicitor and the vendor solicitor will get a sales advice note from the auctioneer. It'll set out some basic terms, including who's buying the property, the location, and the price. It'll also specify any particular special conditions, or may specify, set out some special conditions, and it may set out an aspirational closing date. Bear in mind that the closing date is entirely aspirational, and the auctioneer might as well pluck a figure or a date out of his ass, quite frankly, because, you know, it's all going to depend on a lot of stuff. But ultimately, the closing date in the contract will have some relevance, but the closing date in the sales advice note won't really. Once the sales advice note goes out to the auctioneers, or goes out to the solicitors, particularly the solicitor for the vendor, he then must draft up the contract for sale of the property. That will be sent to your solicitor along with copy title documents. At that point then, your solicitor is going to raise some pre-contract inquiries and make inquiries about the property. Those inquiries are likely to focus on things like services. Is there public water? Is there sewerage? Is it septic tank? What way is the property serviced in terms of road access? Is the road in charge of the local authority, and so on? Your solicitor should also be raising inquiries, depending on the contract and depending on the title documents that are furnished, about planning, about building regulations, about any development that might have been carried out on the property. So these are standard, bog standard pre-contract inquiries that your solicitor is going to carry out before he or she lets you or invites you into his office to sign the contract. He's going to be doing that. Meanwhile, you need to get your finance in place. In relation to finance, you need to get a firm written offer from a lender. So approval in principle is one thing. A loan pack, a letter of offer with specific special conditions in it is another thing. That's what you need, okay? Because your solicitor is not going to let you sign the contract without finance being in place. And that's just a prudent measure. When you're fancy or figuring out though your finances, you need to consider outlays that you may not have thought of at first. You need to consider property registration authority fees, stamp duty, legal searches, commissioners for oaths fees, and there's another one or two that may arise, but you need to ensure that you factor in all the outlays, all the costs. Obviously the professional fee for the solicitor is going to be a cost you need to factor in as well. So all of these you need to have your hands on and be able to give to your solicitor before closing. So assuming you've got your finance in place, assuming the loan pack has come out to your solicitor, then your solicitor, and assuming that your solicitor is satisfied with the replies that he's received to the pre-contract inquiries, assuming that that's the case, then your solicitor is going to invite you into the office, his office or her office, to sign the contract. And on signing the contract, you're going to be paying 10% deposit, 10% of the purchase price. That essentially means that if the house, for example, costs, let's say 250 grand, 10% is 25 grand. Let's say you've paid 5 grand booking deposit, then your deposit when you're signing the contract is going to be 20 grand, so that's 25 grand, that's 5 grand. That's what you're going to have to pony up on the day that you sign the contract. Contract then or contracts are sent back to the other solicitor by your solicitor, and once that happens, the vendor's solicitor will get the vendor in, vendor signs the contract and sends one copy back to your solicitor. At that stage, when the vendor sends back the contract signed, then and only then is your binding contract in place. So between then and completion, you're looking at ensuring your finances in place with a view to the closing date. So the closing date then will have been specified in the contract, and that's what you and your solicitor is going to have to work towards in terms of completing the transaction. Excuse me. You need to make sure that your finance is available and sorted out, and whatever special conditions the bank may have imposed, you need to be ensure that they have been complied with. Because if they haven't been complied with, bank won't release the loan check. If bank doesn't release the loan check, then the sale won't close. So the typical issues that might arise in relation to loan check not being issued or released on time would be things like life assurance, your life assurance not being in place, house insurance not being in place, completed direct debit mandate not being in place. All of these things need to be in place for the bank to release the loan. Once they release the loan, then your solicitor can complete the sale on the closing date. On closing date then, what's going to happen is your solicitor is going to transfer the closing funds, all of the closing funds, to the vendor solicitor. And he's going to get some legal searches carried out to see that there's no judgment on the property that you're buying, no judgment registered since you first signed the contract and now you're coming up to completion, the legal searches will throw up any judgments or anything like that on title. Hopefully none of that will occur, but your solicitor will need to take that prudent step. On closing day then, the house is to be handed over to you as the purchaser on closing day, and you essentially pick up the keys from either your solicitor or from the estate agent. Now, you're entitled to vacant possession on closing day, and vacant possession sometimes can give rise to disputes or rows, because sometimes vendors will leave a whole pile of crap in the house, old furniture especially if the property was let, and the vendor may or may not be too fussy about tidying up and cleaning up, and there may be the cost of a skip involved in getting stuff taken away and so on. Bottom line is, from a legal perspective, you are entitled to vacant possession on closing day, and if vacant possession is not being handed over, then you're not obliged to close. So, keep that in mind, and it's probably prudent to carry out a pre-closing inspection, that is the day before you close, just to ensure that there isn't a skip or two of rubbish in your back garden or in the front, or a whole pile of rubbish in the house. A lot of wasted, rotten furniture, perhaps beds, useless tables and sofas and stuff like that. All of that is going to spoil your enjoyment of taking over the property on closing day, and it's also going to necessitate you getting some sort of a skip in and waste removal firm involved, and it's going to be a pain in the ass. So that can be avoided if you carry out a pre-closing inspection. Once the sale closes, then your solicitor will authorise the other solicitor to release the funds, and the other solicitor, the vendor solicitor, will authorise the estate agent to release the keys, and you can pick the keys up. After that, then you move into the house or do what you like with it, and your solicitor then is going to pay stamp duty and is going to register your property, or your ownership of the property, the transfer, with the Property Registration Authority, and register you as the new owner. He's also going to register the lender's charge on the property, the lender's mortgage, as a charge or a burden on the folio, and that way the lender is secured. After that, then the solicitor acting for you is going to send off all the title documents to the lender along with a certificate of title, and that's the job done. The bank has lent the money, they have the title deeds, you're living in the house, the solicitor's done the job, and hopefully everybody will be happy enough for a while anyway. And that's essentially it from start to finish. There may be one or two things that I've left out there, but that gives you a broad idea of what's involved between looking at a property, some of the factors that you need to take into account when you are choosing one, the procedure in point of the contract being drafted by the vendor or solicitor, the pre-contract inquiries that your solicitor has to carry out, the various steps you have to take to ensure that your finance in place, and ultimately then completion on closing day. And that's the bottom line, that's start to finish. Hope you find this video useful. If you do, give it a thumbs up down below, and you may be interested in subscribing to my YouTube channel. My YouTube channel has a lot of videos on it. I put one up or two up every week about some aspect of Irish law, whether it's employment, whether it's property, whether it's business, and people find them pretty useful. And as I say, if you find this one useful, I would appreciate if you give it a thumbs up down below. Thanks for watching.